Stan, we're live.
And thank you. That mysterious voice you hear there is Larry, the Liberty guy, setting up the show. Thanks to Larry for all his work, and you'll see his comments in the YouTube area. All right, so in the dugout, we always start with caps or team logo. So listen, you're going to be sick of me. Hopefully it's going to be for a few more weeks, but it's all Green Bay Packers right now. So I got the cap on, I got the other jacket on, I had a different on yesterday. And as you know, they're playing in the NFC Football Conference Championship game against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers on Sunday. So I know I don't know. You know, it's interesting. I would say about half the Patriots fans I talk to mad at Brady, don't care about the Bucs, and I would say there's the other half who are now cheering for the Bucs. That maybe they wouldn't cheer for the Patriots, but they love Brady so much, and they're now sort of Bucs fans. So feel free to enter into the chat if you're a Patriots fan. Are you going to join me in cheering for the Packers? Or are you going to stick with Tom Brady, your hero, and rightfully so, and cheer for the Bucs? So we'll have a little fun. Nothing wrong with a little sports fun. Okay, today we're going to get to it a little later in the show, about 20, 25 minutes, but we were right. Dr. Andrew Bostom was right. We've been talking about critical threshold data, cycle threshold data, how critical it is to public policy, to individual health. And just last week, the World Health Organization finally put out new guidelines recognizing the importance of CT testing, CT data testing values. Not only they might be returning a lot of false positives, but also, just as we said, also so important for health providers to have for the care of their own patients. They need to have that information. So again, Dr. Boston, we were right, and you heard it first on this show. Don't forget about that. And you also heard first on this show, Gina Raimondo getting the Commerce Secretary. We mentioned that, told you our sources told us that back in mid-November. So again, in the dugout, you know, we're still a young sort of journalism outfit, but we're hitting some big issues like nobody else is. All right. So today we're going to start off in a minute, a little bit more on President Biden's big day yesterday. Is he really the great unifier that he claims he's going to be? Does the White House have a basement for him? I'll explain that in a few minutes. And then we'll bring on Dr. Bostom and we'll talk and your questions. Again, we'll invite you to call in, ask questions with Dr. Bostom. We also invite you to, as always, to post your comments on YouTube. And don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube live or after the fact, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so yet. But you can zoom in and just listen. You can zoom in and chat with us. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can call in. You can see the number down here as well. So however your viewing pleasure is, we want to accommodate you anyway. But again, please subscribe, and then you'll get instant notifications whenever we go live on this channel. Okay, news flash. Oh, by the way, next week, no show tomorrow, but next week we will start talking about legislation being submitted in Rhode Island. And we're already reaching out to, we've already got, we haven't set a time yet, but we've also got agreement from one bill sponsor with regard to abortion, a big issue that's, you know, it's not settled. There's a lot more to talk about here. And we're hoping to have another issue on corporate censorship. So we'll stay tuned for announcements on those bill sponsors. But we hope to have bill sponsors on, discuss legislation with you. I mean, this is, you know, now we're into the middle. We're just about getting into the height of legislative session. And the national news is now quieting down with the elections over, with Biden now installed. And now we can turn a lot of our attention to Rhode Island. Trust me, there'll be a lot of controversial topics to talk about here in Rhode Island. All right, here's the news flash. Rhode Island is still in a state of pandemic emergency. And the General Assembly is still cowardly, hiding under their desks, eschewing, neglecting their authorized powers to alter or override the governor for the good of the state. Our state is not doing good. As you know, we've been ranked among the worst jurisdictions in the world when it comes to COVID cases, when it comes to deaths per capita, and also, again, as you know, when it comes to economics. So it's not like we've had a trade-off with that where we've shut down and we've crushed the economy in order to have good health results. We're having lousy health results and lousy economic results. And our governor gets awarded with the Commerce Secretary cabinet appointment for that. But our unemployment rate just went up throughout the country. You know, states are growing, economy's coming back, people are hiring, but not in Rhode Island. The General Assembly still refuses to override this governor and to put Rhode Islanders back to work. We know what works from a health point of view now. We know we can open our economy without without shutdowns. Masks, another issue. So anyway, and then also as we've talked about many times on this station, and I'll share this one with you as well. Our senator got a mention in the Providence Journal today. So with the governor departing, there's a big Providence Journal article apparently coming out tomorrow. Here's the electronic version, the digital version, mixed record on the environment. They're talking about the transportation and climate tax that she's trying to impose on us. They put out her, legislative record on the environment, which really isn't that strong. But here it is. Here's what we got mentioned. Describe the regional transportation initiative as a ruse designed to finance an extreme green agenda devised by elites. And that's true. And our friends over at the Gatsby Project also signed that letter we talked about yesterday. Now, it is a ruse. Just a quick summary. They're saying they're putting this gas tax out there to save the environment. They're not. They're putting this gas tax out there just to get more money for their left-wing agenda. All right, let's be very clear about that. That's what the ruse is. All right, it's always about money, pretty much. Okay, also other news in Rhode Island, and then we'll get to Joe Biden. There is a March for Life Saturday, 11 a.m. to noon on the south side of the State House steps. That's the side where the mall is. And Bishop Tobin is holding his annual Respect for Life Mass at 9 a.m. at the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul. So the abortion issue is coming back. There is a March for Life nationally and locally. And this Saturday is the local rally at the State House if you're interested. Okay, for 4 years, we have seen nothing but negative headlines about the President of the United States in the Providence Journal. And today, as if we were in a non-democracy before, Joe Biden's election has restored democracy to America. What a hero. What a hero. I mean, we're all just thrilled. Democracy has prevailed. It was at risk, and now it's back. Even though this Biden presidency is going to be infringing on our freedoms and on our rights and on our freedoms, and is going to be raising costs on everything from energy and healthcare with all their crazy governmental mandates, democracy has prevailed. All these tyrannical mandates that we're about to see, all the cancellation of all the successes that Trump's executive orders are going to be canceled or repealed, but democracy has prevailed. The left-wing agenda, clearly foremost in Joe Biden's mind. Clearly, he puts the agenda and appeasing his left-wing base ahead of the prosperity and well-being of we, the people. But democracy has prevailed. be comforted by it. Joe Biden. So we talked a little bit about his speech yesterday. We'll talk a little bit more about it today. He mentioned in his speech the cascading crises of our era. 6 crises that the U.S. must face and conquer. Virus, okay, agree with that. Climate change, not if it means killing the economy. Growing inequality, whatever the hell that means. There's never equality. There's equality under the law, but there's never equal out. It's a myth. America's global standing. So appeasing the globalists is the way that Joe Biden wants to increase America's global standing. Standing up to them and asserting America's independence is the way Donald Trump approached it. I don't think that's a crisis right now. Racism, I'm sorry, it's not a crisis. It's a problem isolated here and there. It's not a national crisis. I don't believe it. And an attack on truth and democracy. It isn't that just beautiful? Those who live in Never Never Land, those who believe Never Never Land truths, just because they wish it to be true, it is true, are the ones who are trying to tell us that we're the ones who lack truth. I mean, the world is upside down. I mean, pretty much, I mean, if you look at it, and I've talked about this with my wife, with a lot of other people, pretty much everything the Democrats accuse the Republicans or the conservatives of, it's what they're guilty of. It's like, and we saw that with the Russia collusion. The whole Russia collusion, the FBI, if you haven't seen it, I'm not making this up, this is true. The FBI recently released declassified documents show that the Russia collusion was created to cover up Hillary Clinton's problems. So they create these smoke screens, blame it on us. Of course, when you get the media to go along with it, it's a win-win for them. Now the truth is coming out. We'll see where it goes. Biden also calls, he's trying to position himself as the great unifier. He's calling for an end to the uncivil war. The uncivil war, clever, good term. But in his first day in office and in his address, he did anything but unified. Take a look at this. Again, we talked about this yesterday. How is it unifying that one of your first acts is to kill a major construction project with a partner in Canada that's going to result in tens of thousands of jobs lost in America and in Canada? It's going to result in higher energy costs for everybody. It's going to result in less energy independence for America. And it's going to, as the Wall Street Journal says, insult Canada, our friends to the north. That unifying as one of your first acts? It takes leadership. We talked about this yet, to be a unifier. And right off the bat, Biden doesn't do that. Just hours after he issues an executive order mandating masks on all federal property, here's Joe Biden. This is right after he signed. Here's Joe Biden on federal property in the Lincoln Mall without a mask. That leadership, that unifying when the elites are shown that they don't have to follow the own laws they make. Is that a unifying example? And as we said yesterday, he said he wants to be the president for even those who didn't vote for him, but yet he calls them, or many of them, white supremacists and domestic terrorists. Is that leadership, unification by example? He repealed President Trump's transgender, allow transgender students to go whatever bathroom they feel like today. They allow biological boys to play on girls' sports teams if they believe they're a woman that day. Again, when you give special rights or special consideration to the tiny minority And at, and who cares about the rights of the vast mass majority? Is that unifying? Watch out for your Second Amendment rights, your property rights, or religious rights. He's already talking about repealing some of the protections that were granted, for instance, to the Little Sisters of the Poor, looking to codify Roe versus Wade decision into some kind of law somehow. He's real, that's a hot button issue, and you're going right after it in your first days. Okay, we can agree to disagree on it, but it's not unifying to right away go after these hot button issues. What it's proving is that he's more concerned with the leftist agenda and appeasing the left than he is with unifying. And he is with setting an example, finding issues that everybody can agree with. I'm wondering, and then he's been silent on so many issues, right? And that's not leadership either, and that's not unifying. Here's a little something I saw today. We now have the government, big tech, big media, many others in big business working together to shut out the opponents of Joe Biden and his Democrat Party, to shut us down, to cancel us, to deprogram us, whatever it takes to remove us from the conversation. And when you see that triumvirate, big tech, big corporation, and government working together to shut people down, that is totalitarianism, folks. That's what it is. I mean, I don't know if it's fascism, I don't know if it's socialism, I don't know if it's communism, probably a little bit of everything, but it's totalitarianism for sure. Joe Biden's silent on that, with all these people getting banned from Twitter, Facebook, getting kicked off flights, having their insurance canceled, whatever. Joe Biden's been silent on that. He's been silent on what would be a very divisive impeachment against Donald Trump for no reason. Hurried for no reason. Silent on that. Wouldn't it be unifying to say, listen, let's not go there? Nothing. He was silent on the summer riots. I wonder if he's going to be silent on this. I mean, just yesterday, here's the great unifier. And already on the day of his inauguration, Antifa in Seattle and Portland are rioting and destroying property again. They're saying we are ungovernable. Governable. Well, that's a tough ungovernable. Okay, got it that time. They're back. Joe Biden, they're supposed to be gone with Joe Biden as president. What happened? They're back. I don't think he can remain silent on this one. But speaking of, he was silent on the militarization of D.C., the 25, 40,000 troops. I don't know how many, rumored to be in that range. Silent on the accusations that some of them were white supremacists and needed to be removed. He was silent on that. So my question is, given his silence on all this, just like he was silent on so many issues during the campaign, the White House, I can imagine, must have a really nice basement that Joe Biden can hide in. Hide in Biden. They probably have a really nice basement. I don't know if it's as nice as the one he had at his home in Delaware, but Joe Biden, it looks like, is going to be hiding in that basement quite a bit. I think even today I heard a news clip where he basically said, come on, man, don't be asking me stuff like that. Is that leadership? And you know who should join Joe Biden in the basement? Gina Raimondo. Yes. I mean, it was all over the news today. She's been criticized for herself hiding Gina. She's been nowhere. She's had one media availability since before Christmas. Nothing really. No answered no questions since she was not officially nominated for commissar. What's going on? What are these people afraid of? We know they're afraid of what we say because they're shutting us down left and right and not doing anything about it, despite the great traditions and laws we have in our state. But why are they afraid to talk themselves? I don't know. I don't know. But I think a nice basement in the White House for Gina and for Joe, that'd be good. That'd be good. So we'll have to see. Just a couple more thoughts, and I don't know, Larry, do we have the doctor on yet? Or do I have a few more minutes?
We have a few more minutes, Stan. Not yet.
All right, let me know because I'm not following the people who are on board. By the way, if you are on our Zoom call and you'd like to ask a question, type it in the chat first, or just a summary of the question. That way, Larry knows to call on you. If you're on our Zoom call and just want to listen, that's fine. Welcome to the show, and welcome to everybody watching live on YouTube. I see Roland is out there. American Woman, that's a good one. I haven't seen that name before, and that's cool. Welcome. Okay. Points off the board. So I mentioned earlier that clearly Biden has already signaled that he's going to put appeasing the left-wing radicals and their agenda is more important than the well-being of we the people. We talked about how yesterday not to be downtrodden about the day yesterday, the transition of power to the Democrats, to a socialist. It's really socialists, not so much Democrats, or somebody who's going to be controlled by socialists in the Senate, at the White House, already with the House, that we were really winning, and that we trust that this team, the Biden team, is going to start. It's their turn. It's their turn at bat. They're going to score some runs this inning. They've scored some runs. We don't like it, but they're scoring runs. That's the way it goes. We scored our runs for a bunch of years. Now it's their turn to score some runs. But they're going to actually take points off the board. When they start killing jobs like they're doing with the Keystone Pipeline, when they start killing jobs, or when he rejoins the Paris climate and starts sending American wealth and American jobs to other countries, they're going to lose points. So be patient. Like we said yesterday, we're going to win, and we are winning right now. Clearly, this radical agenda that Biden is clearly signaled that he's going to do everything he can to advance absolutely ensures that we will have a weaker and poorer and more divided America. You know, the funny thing is that most people don't understand is that the left-wing progressive socialist agenda is divisive by nature. How can government give something to somebody, whatever special interest, victim class they want, without taking it from somebody else? By definition, that is divisive. You pit one group of people against another group of people. It has to be. Now, we accept, all of us, that in a wealthy society like America, that it's okay to pay some of our earnings to help those most in need. But we're not very happy about it when you crush our economy and you take so much and you're giving it to people who aren't in need, but who just check some victim special interest box that the left dreams up as being a victim in Never Never Land. So, there's a lot of other policies, stopping the wall, letting migrants come in, granting amnesty to undocumented. That's unfair to the people who have waited in line legally and honestly. That's not fair. That's not unifying. That's divisive in itself. They're looking at infringing on landlords' rights, banning more evictions and making them suffer. That's not fair. That's not unifying. student loan forgiveness, unfair to all the students who did pay off their loans and are working to pay it off. They just want to start extending that. That's not fair. That's not unifying. Yes, of course, the people who say, give me free stuff will be happy, but it's who's going to pay for it? It's not unifying. The mask mandate. You know, a lot of people, just it doesn't work. I mean, it sounded nice, but the stats show it doesn't work. Just like shutdowns don't work. So this agenda over prosperity is definitely going to lose points on the board for their team. So stay patient. We're going to go ahead and we're going to win very soon. All right. I think we have Dr. Boston.
Doc,
all right.
Unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi.
Hey, Doc. How are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. I got my Packers stuff on. You back to UConn stuff?
That's all I got up here.
That's all you got up there?
That's all I got up here where I access my computer.
All right. We got a lot. All right. Welcome back, Dr. Boston. And by the way, before we're going to get to it in just a few minutes, but the headline of today's show is You Were Right. Now even the World Health Organization is supporting what you said. So hold that thought. We'll get to that. Hey, I just got a funny I wanted to share with you here. And I want to talk about lockdowns just for a few minutes from this.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
We haven't prepped you on this, but this is a good funny I saw today. So.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. And in Rhode Island, who knows what the heck's going to happen. And then here's another chart I saw, and then I'll have you comment on both of them. That this was interesting. I'm trying to think who put this out here. I didn't capture who put this chart out. But right here, in those states with no lockdowns,
All right.
they did better than states that had total lockdowns or strict lockdowns or minimal lockdowns.
Right. And
So,
this is okay. Weighted mortality. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this has to do with deaths. Yep.
There's a meta-analysis by Stanford epidemiologists, a team led by Professor John Ines, which analyzed data from around the world and basically found that there's no advantage to the stricter degrees of lockdown versus a model like Sweden or Japan, where social distancing was practiced, et cetera. One country, Sweden, prefers not to mask. Japan had some masking, but regardless, compared to the very strict lockdowns that were undertaken in parts of the United States and certainly in Europe and Europe again now, absolutely no advantage, and big disadvantages, Mike. And I think that's not often discussed.
Well, the economic, sure, yeah, and social.
Well, but the economic lead to excess mortality, and so there was an economic analysis done just recently, which suggested that the penalty is large. That 15 years out, excess mortality approaches, I think, 800,000, and by 20 years out, close to 1.5 million. From the economic shock and the health-related consequences caused by it. So these are not, they're put off into the future to a certain extent. Other things are not so futuristic. There's another analysis that came out from a British group of a British cardiology group to show that at least in terms of people seeking care for acute congestive heart failure and for acute myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, just like they saw in the spring with their spring uptick, they saw a big decline, which they believe is translating or is going to translate into excess mortality because people didn't seek attention for treatable heart attacks, treatable congestive heart failure. They're seeing that uptick again in relation to, they're seeing that down. The decrease in people seeking a medical care for those treatable conditions with the fall, late fall, early winter spike. So, between the fear mongering and the lockdowns, there are enormous health consequences, and some of it's interrelated to economic, and those things are very important. But even more acutely is people limiting their access to medical care because they're afraid they'll get infected.
So we also, I don't want to go into it now, but just agree, we also talked on this show how mask mandates statistically are also shown not to work. So I mean, so just in general, just quickly, what was it, this hysteria? The first article you wrote that caught our attention was an unhysterical reaction. But is it just hysteria that has caused these governments to issue these lockdown and mask mandates? I mean, there really is no scientific historical basis for any of that, is there?
We've mentioned this before, but the debates about what would happen with an influenza pandemic that was of this proportion or worse, ruled out. These debates go back 2 decades. The previous generation of epidemiologists confronted with things like H1N1, the swine flu, and variants that could be just as virulent or more virulent, and thinking back to 1918 flu pandemic, how devastating it was, or 57, 58, which hit this country quite hard. They saw no advantage to lockdowns and tremendous downsides. They saw no advantage to mask mandates. I mean, that was sort of more benign, but they certainly saw no advantage to it. And the idea of certainly in the modern era, penalizing people for things like that was just abhorrent to them. So I don't know how we evolved. But look, Mike, the bottom line is there's enough randomized clinical trial data between influenza attempts to prevent influenza, and even one large trial that was completed in Denmark during the spring uptick in coronavirus. These randomized trials are uniformly negative. They do not show an advantage of masking versus not masking because these respiratory viruses spread so easily. And that's also one of the tragedies about the nursing home situation. There was a very good write-up that Alex Berenson, the journalist, received on a real tragedy. The unidentified nursing home did its absolute best, constant screening, constant scrubbing, cleansing. The virus got in there and it was lethal. It killed 12 people. And
well, we know this state was guilty too of allowing infected staff back into nursing homes, or at least into veterans homes.
Yeah, this was a very different situation. They were fastidious in trying to prevent the virus from getting into their facility, and it did.
All right, let's move on. So we got 3 more, just to let everyone know what's coming up with you in the next 25 minutes or so. We're going to do our traditional look at just some COVID data in Rhode Island and get your thoughts on that. We'll get through that pretty quickly. We want to talk next about the big topic today, how you were right, how the World Health Organization is now backing you up on what you said about cycle threshold values. And then we'll talk about vaccines a little bit more. I can see we got a few questions from some of our YouTube listeners. So let me show you this. This is not a chart you sent me, but it's a chart I like to start with. Just the number of cases in Rhode Island. We're going to look at the percentage, but we can see in raw numbers, gross numbers, even the cases are going down fairly significantly. Do you know if this is a trend we're seeing throughout the country?
Yes, most parts of the country. As a matter of fact, the upper Midwest, which had an earlier version of this fall winter uptick, they were coming down before the state of Rhode Island. There's still some problems, in California, or parts of California, Southern California, and some of that may have to do with the border. No, the overall trend is that it's seasonal, Mike, and there's a strong argument that makes more.
When is the season? Do we know? Is this season the same as the flu season, or
or should I say it's seasonalizing now? I mean, we see a dramatic absence of flu, and at least for this particular quote unquote flu season, COVID-19 may have replaced it. maybe becoming an endemic virus.
Can you have both at the same time?
It could be possible, but there's also this phenomenon of viral interference, which may be playing a role. And also there's a lot of rhinovirus, the common
A lot of what?
Rhinovirus, which is the common cold.
Okay.
That's around. And in the past, that has blunted the flu. Why it wouldn't blunt coronavirus at the same time, I have no idea. But regardless, and also we're just, the other thing is it's still a byproduct of all this testing.
Yeah,
The testing is beyond anything we've ever done for any other.
So here's the testing percentages, the positivity rate. Today or yesterday in Rhode Island, it was down to 3.5, even lower.
Right. This is for the end of the week, the week ending Saturday, I guess, the 16th.
Right, last week. Yep.
And so we see a nice steady declining trend. Back to levels that we were at in November, in early to mid-November. So this is quite positive, and it sounds like perhaps next week we'll see even a lower value. Maybe
so would it be fair to say, if you look at those two charts we looked at, that we could be ending the season?
It's quite possible. It's quite possible because we've had all these mass the holiday seasons, and I know it was really attenuated this year, but still we've had those events that could have been, quote, super spreader events. It just seems to be fitting a pattern of perhaps seasonality for the virus.
All right, then we look at hospitalizations.
They've really come down. In the past I've said, flattened, but now they're coming down. Now there's a clear downward trend, and hopefully, mortality will follow that. It looks like mortality has at least flattened, but these are the hospitalizations. They're clearly down.
And the one thing about hospitalizations is, while it's on a downward trend, which is great, it never reached the spikes of. I mean, we got up to maybe 400 or 500 hospitals, but it never reached the multiple thousands or more that they were projecting.
Remember the original Brown, somewhere in the Brown Department of Epidemiology model was that we would get over 3,000 hospitalizations back in the spring.
So you're right. So here we're looking at the deaths per day or per week. What is this?
These are daily counts by date of death. Remember, Mike, date of death. Not some composite of days that could go back weeks. These are the actual days of death, and this is the last 2 months. It's the 20th of November to the 20th of January.
And as you said earlier, with hospitalizations going down and cases going down, we would expect those numbers to start going down. They've certainly stabilized.
They've certainly flattened, but we hope they'll go down now.
All right. So I guess you would say then that, well, that looked good in Rhode Island. You are seeing similar trends nationally.
Yes, and we're also seeing much less stress on the hospitals. The hospitalization data, actually, they were never, when you looked at them nationally, when you looked at them even by state, other than a few isolated locations, there was never they never lived up to the hysteria that was being cranked out in the media. There was lots of hospital capacity. One of the problems is with this over testing is you're stressing the staff because you have to quarantine so many people, many of whom may be being quarantined unnecessarily, that begins to stress the staff, even if the patient volume is not really unusual for this time of year.
All right, so I'm just going to flash this briefly, but just to make it look official. But the World Health Organization, you can see how recent this was. And well, that's, maybe.
Well, actually, they conveniently delayed releasing it for a week. It came out on a magical day, didn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so the report was ready then. They didn't release it. It was ready on the 13th. Right. They didn't release it. What else happened on January 20th?
Yeah, right. It took them a week to translate it into English, right? Okay, so maybe the French and Spanish versions came out earlier.
So bottom line is, it seems like the World Health Organization now supports everything you've been saying, that cycle threshold data, which basically measures how much virus you have if you get a virus, if you get a positive test, is really important for a number of reasons, right?
Well, they're advising, I think, three important things. That
Now, let's
first
take
of
them one
all,
at a time. One, what?
yeah, one at least what they call one. Number three would be not my one, but
Okay, all
what
right.
they call one is that, yeah, it is indeed a surrogate for viral load, for the amount of virus that you're infected with. Number two is that if you
Now, wait a
get
minute. Before we leave one, we heard on a radio show here last week that a doctor on the Rhode Island Health, McDonald, I think his name is,
yeah,
said, "Oh, it's not a reliable test if you look at it quantitatively."
yeah, well,
But it
that's
seems
not.
like the World Health Organization says, "Well, it's a pretty important number to look at."
Yeah, well, first of all, there is, we're talking, again, let's sort of backtrack. We're talking about our RT-PCR, so reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, which is amplifying, in this
Say that
case,
3 times fast. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
a segment of the the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2's RNA, its genetic backbone. It's amplifying specific target segments that represent certain genes, and that in essence can translate into estimations for the amount of the number of viral particles, the amount of virus in a specimen, which is of course a surrogate for how much is in the person. So yeah, sure, there's plenty of potential, for errors. But the point is, when you look at the massive amount of data that's accumulated now, it's turning out to be a reasonable
Good.
surrogate
As you were telling us for months.
for viral load. So what the World Health Organization said is that if you have marginal positives, so positives that occur where you're having to amplify the specimen, the virus, the RNA in the specimen, an extraordinary amount undergoes an extraordinary amount of amplification at the limit of the testing procedure.
Right.
That those sort of marginal positives, or what we would call, Mike, high CT, high cycle threshold positives, should certainly be repeated. And then they go on to say, which I think is most important.
All right. So let's say that on number two. Let's just say one more second. So if you have no symptoms,
right,
and if your test shows a really high cycle threshold value, which means you probably have little, if any, active virus, that you should take the test again.
yes,
basically.
Yes, you should repeat it on the same, preferably, the same lab, or at least, because again, certain tests amplify different genes, but at least if it's done in another lab, they should be using the same basic methodology.
Okay, great.
So,
All right,
but
now
repeat
number
the
three,
test.
the
Repeat
big one.
test.
The big one, number three. What are they also recommending here?
That value should go to your healthcare provider, and
Your
in turn,
doctor.
the healthcare provider should provide it to you. But that's between you and your healthcare provider. But that is the big one, Mike. The WHO is finally acknowledging. By the way, what Indian physicians, both clinicians and laboratory scientists, have been discussing for months now is that the public should be demanding this information. The physicians should get it and share it with them, et cetera. That this is not a new thing, compared to, even though World Health is just getting to this now. It's interesting. You don't hear this yet from CDC. I find that quite interesting.
Now, I'm going to have Larry the Liberty Guy jump in here for a second. Because of what you told us months ago, we started a petition to compel or to ask the state to release and start collecting the COVID-19 data, release it en masse anonymously, of course, so we can see what's going on collectively in our state, and also to authorize it being released to patients, just as now the World Health Organization is recommending. Larry, can you chime in and verbally give everybody the website for where they can sign the petition, which will send an email to multiple people at the governor's office and the Department of Health? And would you also put the link in the chat? But so we can tell our viewers, what is that website, Larry?
I'd be happy to do that. So it's rifreedom.org/COVID-transparency. So if they go to rifreedom.org/COVID transparency. It'll pop right up for them. It'll also be in the chat on YouTube. And this is speaking out in this way is one of the most effective things that our viewers can do to make a difference. This is a very powerful action, and I'll make sure everybody has it.
Yeah, we had many emails. And I think, Larry, let's remember to put out a media release tomorrow on this WHO statement. But let's have Dr. Bossum talk a little bit more about how important this is for doctors to get
Mike,
when treating
let's
their
just,
patients.
we can remind people, but of the various information requests that went into the state. We were able to obtain data at least through June, and it was very interesting what we saw. And I'm still waiting to hear if we can get the basic findings published. But we've presented them in a lay presentation, and essentially what we saw is that as we moved from the very intense period in the spring where there was significant mortality, there was lots of hospitalization, to that ebbing as you got to the end of May and certainly into early June, we lo and behold, it was mirrored in the average values of the cycle thresholds of all the testing the state lab was doing at the time, going up and up and up, so that by the time you got to this period where there was really a almost down to the lowest levels of hospitalization and mortality, the average cycle threshold at which patients were or people being examined were tested positive was at a level that is compatible with being unable to culture live virus. So it just seems to be a useful
culture is the only way it can spread, in your body or to somebody else, right? It has to culture itself, right?
But yes, exactly. That's the purpose. That's the purpose of confirming with viral culture. But the point is that it's a good way to monitor the intensity of the epidemic, in addition to potentially making individualized decisions with patients. So there should be complete transparency about these data. In other words, every day, like when we just reviewed, the week that it was down to 5% positives, and it's on a graphic, and that just comes from the state's website. There's absolutely no reason why they couldn't show what the distribution was, just like we plotted. What was the distribution that week, or frankly, each day of the batch of positive tests? How many were above 30? How many were below 20? Things that could be broken down and simply explained.
Very helpful to public discourse, no question.
Right.
As well as the WHO, as well as the doctors who have patients with it. All right. So before we go on to vaccines, one political kind of statement here, or discussion. So the WHO, I believe, pretty much admits that the high, I don't know if they said it exclusively, but a high cycle threshold value, which means a low amount of virus, are pretty much akin to a false positive.
Yeah, the language doesn't come straight out and say that. They're kind of marginal positives is what they refer to.
Fair enough. All right, but isn't it interesting that are they now suggesting, and do you think labs might lower or raise the threshold by lowering the cycle value for a positive test? And first, let me ask you that.
I don't know. They're silent on that, but you could, if you want it, you could make that implication, but they're silent on it. They certainly haven't come out and said, "Oh, we believe that, routinely labs should not run through 40 or 45 cycles. Right. They should stop running at 35.
All right, I'm going to make a prediction. No comment from you. I don't want to put you're not into politics like I am. Well, you are, but that's not why we have you on the show. But I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict that labs are going to start lowering the threshold at which, or however you want to look at it, lowering the CT value, so we can start showing far fewer positives, so that we can make Joe Biden look better. That's going to be my prediction. Okay, let's see if it comes true or not. I am so cynical of all these groups.
The other thing they could do, Mike, is use faster testing methodologies that aren't RT-PCR, and that are probably less sensitive. They could do that too. They're called lateral flow tests. A lot of that's already being, underway. Who knows? I mean, but the bottom line is those tests are supposed to be confirmed with PCR tests. So,
Oh, really? Okay.
yes.
All
So
right.
we're probably going to see PCR tests for a while.
Now, we got about 7-8 minutes left. Let's go to vaccines. Before we get into some charts and other visuals, just a few questions that I'm looking through from the people who have commented. Is there any, I mean, based on anything you've read, is there any reason to be you've never been in before? So do you have any reason to be worried about the vaccines themselves and any secondary effects or harmful components in those vaccines?
Well, I will say that, and people can access this themselves. It takes a little bit of sort of a learning curve to be able to extract the information you want. But there's something called the VAERS that the CDC has put out. It's the Vaccine Adverse Event Report System, Vaccine Adverse Event Report System. And you can do your own searches there, and you can compare how many adverse events people have to fill out a form, whether it's a physician or a layman has to fill out a form. It's a fairly detailed PDF form, and they submit it to the VAERS, and it gets logged in. And there's a lot of events, some of which you would expect. But the last time I looked, and those were only data through the 8th, there had been 55 deaths reported in the United States.
All right, well, what do you know about the ingredients in the vaccine? We've got questions, asking here. I'm looking on YouTube. Is there a way to look at the ingredients in the vaccines? Someone's asking, any reports of making people sterile? Are there any sulfites in the vaccines? So I'm looking at the ingredients right now.
You can. I mean,
you
can get the package insert for the Pfizer vaccine, for the Moderna vaccine, in case there are allergy questions that people might have. But the issue of sterility, it's that we don't have any long-term data, but at this point, it's purely theoretical. There's been severe allergic reactions. One thing in Israel that was discussed briefly because of one case that occurred, and Israel is way ahead of the curve in terms of vaccinating their population. They're actually becoming quite a laboratory, and they've signed over all the data to, they've de-identified the data from everyone that they're vaccinating, and they're turning it over to Pfizer as part of an agreement to get more vaccine. So we will learn things. And we have to assume Pfizer is going to deal with it honestly, and so is the Israeli government. But we will learn a lot. But what they found in Israel that gave at least some clinicians caution is that a young man was vaccinated, an Israeli Arab was vaccinated, and it turned out he had gotten coronavirus prior to being, sometime prior to being vaccinated, and he had an adverse reaction, which suggested to them that, look, let's hold off on vaccinating people that have already been exposed to the virus and had a clinical infection and recovered.
Okay.
So I would certainly, as a word of caution, first of all, there's enough data that indicates that people who go through a bona fide cycle of infection and recovery, they reduce their risk of getting reinfected. This is a health practitioner study, big one, observational study from Great Britain, from the UK. They reduced their risk of getting infected by 85% compared to a comparable group that had not been infected and then got infected over the observation period for the first time. So that's about as effective as the vaccine, and it's occurring naturally.
Okay.
So people that have been infected with bona fide infections and recovered, they could certainly delay getting vaccinated.
Okay. All right.
That's a big group now, Mike. That's a big group of people, including in our state.
All right. We only got a few minutes left. Let's look at some data. First, the chart you sent me, then a couple of headlines from Rhode Island. So there's been a lot of talk about vaccine distribution in our state.
Right.
Who's getting it? How many have been distributed?
And how many the state got, Mike, which I think has become a big excuse. I don't know the ins and outs of how this decision is being made, but I just put these data together, I guess, based on what had been completed as of yesterday. I couldn't get an update for today from the web, from the Florida website. So I just compared Rhode Island, what they had reported yesterday.
So what are you seeing here?
Well, what I'm seeing is, first of all, I mean, just look at the numbers. They kind of speak for themselves. Look, I get it. If Rhode Island is going to complain, well, we got a small allotment. Well, then you could have at least distributed that small allotment to the people who really need it. And begging the question of why did I mean, that's a really small allotment compared to Florida, vaccinating, over 1 million people, and we've barely got over 10,000 people vaccinated. There are all kinds of excuses for that, but regardless, look at what Florida did.
I'm looking at other data here from the WPRI website, which I don't know where your data, and they're showing that.
This is remember, this is not today. If they did a big number today, we won't reflect it.
Yeah, this was through
the
they're showing 76,000 doses administered and another 26,000 in nursing homes. So I'm not sure what.
No, I'm looking at the people. I'm looking at the people vaccinated that are over 60 years old. That's what I'm looking at.
Oh, okay.
So and the percentages are so much smaller in this state. It's really quite outrageous. Whatever the total numbers are, only 65% of the people have been vaccinated that were over 65 in Florida. And only 25%, according to the website.
Are a lot of people here's a headline from a digital newspaper, Go Local Prov. Apparently a rep is so concerned that people are jumping the line. They're supposed to go to the elderly and the nursing home and the infirm first, but they're finding that board members and staff of a lot of these medical establishments are getting vaccines before, the elderly people who are most vulnerable, and she's apparently going to be introducing legislation to make it criminal.
Well,
jump the line
again, and a better example really might even be West Virginia. West Virginia has opted out of the federal distribution system and is doing it directly themselves. And what they found was that they've also vaccinated, orders of magnitude more people than Rhode Island, and they're a small state. They have about 1.7 million people, and they have very difficult areas to get to that are mountainous areas. They have vaccinated their entire nursing home population.
Already done
in West Virginia, and that was done a week and a half ago. So
I think Florida focused on them first as well, didn't they?
Florida has just focused on everyone over 65.
Oh, okay.
All comers.
Okay.
And that's why of the 1,100,000 plus people that have been vaccinated in Florida, 65% of those have been people over 65 and over. So, it's a question of prioritizing. I also don't understand what the glitches are in the distribution system, but it does seem as if maybe Rhode Island is getting a small allotment because it's considered a small state, and that's probably why West Virginia went outside the system to just get it done, in a more sort of privatized way.
Well, we know in Rhode Island that prisoners and certain other inmates and others, are getting it before the most vulnerable, the seniors. In fact, as we just, I'll share it again as we showed you here. There's even the Attorney General is even concerned about why the people laid out by the Department of Health and are not getting it first the way they're supposed to. So we have the makings of a brewing scandal here. I will add a political comment.
Remember, Mike, we also still have roughly 70% of the deaths in Rhode Island that occurred in nursing homes and assisted living facilities for the elderly.
Why wouldn't we go there exclusively first? I don't understand.
Exactly.
So a lot of people don't understand, but this is the Rhode Island culture, right? That the elites, everybody thinks social, young people think socialism is so cool, think that totalitarianism is so cool, but they think they're putting the people first. That's what they say, but they always put themselves first.
Well, I would just say one more thing, Mike, in terms
well,
of.
let me finish that thought. And while certainly hospitals are not part of the government elite, they are part of the elite. And it's the culture in Rhode Island that the elite get special privileges. They get special laws, they get special consideration, handouts, and now they're just taking, without government approval, just apparently taking it upon themselves to say, well, we're going to take care of our people first, even though it's those nursing home and older people supposed to get it. I mean, it's this culture in the state. It's rotten to the core. We have cultivated or cultured, if you want to use that word, a special interest culture. And this is just sickening to me. It's unacceptable that those elites think that they can put themselves ahead of anybody else on a whim. And you don't need to comment on that. That's my political statement. If you have a medical related comment on that, I don't want to draw you into politics.
Well, first of all, I actually agree with your sentiment. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there's a lot of those kinds of problems, unfortunately, in the DNA of Rhode Island. It's shameful. But in terms of prioritizing, if you were going to look at healthcare workers, even there, you could actually stratify. There are healthcare workers that are intensely exposed, even if they're younger. And you could make the argument that, they're intensely exposed, let's protect them. People in the emergency rooms, people in the ICUs. But there's a lot of others in the healthcare profession that aren't so intimately involved. Respiratory therapists, for example, would be another group that would be a high priority.
Right, but they're saying here in the article I showed you, it's board members and staff who don't feel on the front line.
You see, so basic two strata should be the high risk for suffering serious morbidity and mortality, basically the elderly population, particularly institutionalized elderly, and those that are exposed to huge viral loads as part of their occupation. And those should be the priority groups. And then, all bets are off. And then you begin to say, well, who's the lowest risk? Well, that would be all the kids, basically, other than kids with chronic illnesses.
Yep.
And, and why bother them? I mean, this is something that, with a new vaccine, you'd want to be really cautious. Even Israel, which is so aggressive in vaccination, is waiting a long time before they're going to vaccinate those that are 16 and younger.
All right, Dr. Andrew Bossman, I think you're right about this too. I know you were right about your CT value cycle threshold, because now the World Health Organization has backed you up. You heard it first on this show. We might even be one of the first in the country to talk about this, not just.
I think we're certainly the first to get the data out, Mike.
Yep.
Even Florida, where Governor DeSantis, to his credit, mandated that the labs must turn the data over to the state's Department of Health. They haven't put the data out in public.
All right. Andy, thank you for your time. We'll talk to you next week. Enjoy your weekend.
Take care, Mike.
All right, folks. So again, a great show today. We covered a lot of ground, starting with our state, started going to Joe Biden, and now over to CT. But the common theme here is, don't you see the common theme between our comments on Biden and our comments here on people jumping, the elites jumping the line here for the vaccines? That in a totalitarian, leftist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, progressive government, they don't follow the same rules they impose on you and me. They're more interested in the agenda and special treatment for their special friends, victim friends, insider friends, crony friends. It's just like with Animal Farm, right? Again, just remember that. Famous quote from Napoleon the Pig. All animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Folks, this is the way socialist leftist governments work. We just voted one in nationally. We've had one here in Rhode Island for decades. I hope someday we'll change it. Great show. Thanks to Dr. Boston. Thanks for those of you watching. Again, if you have a chance to subscribe, whether you're watching live or after the fact, please hit the red subscribe button. And we will see you next week when we'll start looking at some legislative initiatives, good and bad, in Rhode Island.